Maria Batista, a newly elected black governor, had just been sworn in as the head of one of the largest states in the country. Known for her unwavering commitment to civil rights and social justice, she embodied hope for thousands of citizens, especially those from historically marginalized communities. Her election marked a historic turning point, a symbolic victory in a country still grappling with social and racial inequalities. For years, Maria Batista had fought to defend the rights of the most vulnerable, whether through her support for educational reforms, the establishment of reintegration programs for at-risk youth, or her courageous stands against police injustice. Her journey, marked by perseverance and a refusal to accept injustice, inspired entire generations. She represented a beacon of hope for those who had been left behind, restoring faith in a future where dignity and equal rights would be accessible to all. One evening, as she left a private dinner organized by a charity, Maria found herself face to face with an unimaginable event that would turn her career and personal life upside down. The streets were calm, and the evening had been warm, filled with inspiring discussions about social reforms and helping the less fortunate. Yet, in a matter of moments, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. A group of uniformed police officers, led by an officer named Carlos Mejia, stormed the sidewalk where Maria and her security team were walking. The police had received an emergency call reporting the presence of an armed suspect in the area, someone who had been vaguely described by witnesses. Unfortunately, in the rush and under stress, the information had been miscommunicated, and the officers, partly guided by unconscious bias, mistook Maria for the dangerous criminal they were searching for. Maria, stunned, felt her heart race as the group of officers moved toward her with determination. Before she could fully comprehend what was happening, she found herself surrounded, the officers' faces tense and their eyes suspicious. She tried to speak to them, her voice calm but firm, in an attempt to clarify her identity and dispel any misunderstanding. "I am Maria Batista, the governor," she said, trying to maintain her composure. But her words were drowned out by the chaos of the sirens blaring around her and the officers shouting orders. Officer Mejia, focused on his mission and blinded by the stress of the moment, barked an order: "Put your hands behind your back." Maria, increasingly shocked, found herself in an unbelievable position. She, who was accustomed to being respected for her role and stature. She repeated, her voice rising in the cacophony, "I am the governor." Yet, her words were ignored. She felt the firm hands of an officer forcing her to turn, her arms yanked behind her with brutal force. Her dignity and authority, pillars of her public life, seemed to vanish in seconds under the weight of this humiliating situation. The handcuffs snapped shut painfully around her wrists, symbolizing the absurdity and injustice of the moment. Her security team, quickly realizing the gravity of the mistake, tried to intervene immediately to clarify the situation. They approached the officers, loudly explaining Maria Batista's identity and asking them to verify before making an irreversible error. But in the confusion and tension, their protests were ignored. Officer Mejia, more determined than ever to carry out what he believed was an operation against a dangerous criminal, shoved the security team members aside, ordering them to back off or face arrest themselves. Some members of the team, used to protecting Maria in very different situations, were shocked to be treated as suspects. Some even shoved violently back, disarmed in the face of police authority. The scene, surreal and unbelievable, did not go unnoticed by passers-by, who began to stop and watch. Murmurs spread through the crowd, confusion and indignation mixing as the full scale of the incident became clear. Witnesses, visibly shocked by the brutality of the intervention, began recording with their phones, capturing every moment of this public humiliation. The name of Maria Batista circulated in the whispers of some who recognized her, but this revelation seemed to have no impact on the officers, who, focused on their mission, refused to listen. For Maria, each second spent on the ground, handcuffed and forcefully held by the police, felt like an eternity. The cold concrete beneath her, the stern faces of the officers holding her, and the utter confusion of the situation filled her with deep humiliation. This moment, so brutal and absurd, carried an unbearable mix of anger and sadness. She felt her dignity trampled, her authority reduced to nothing in a matter of minutes. But beyond her own indignation, Maria felt an overwhelming sadness at the injustice of the situation. This experience, far more than a mere assault on her personal dignity, embodied the daily struggles faced by those she had sworn to defend. She, the governor, with all her power and status, found herself living in an instant what so many others endured every day without ever receiving justice. She understood, in a painfully intimate way, the fear, helplessness, and anger of those for whom she had always fought. Once she arrived at the police station, it took less than 10 minutes for the huge mistake to be revealed, but the damage had already been done. Maria Battista, still handcuffed, waited in the interrogation room, her thoughts swirling between anger and the deep humiliation she had just endured. The governor, a respected figure elected to defend civil rights, found herself sitting in this cold room, like a criminal, confronted with the injustice of those who should have been the guardians of the law. The police chief, urgently alerted to the monumental error that had just occurred, rushed in, his footsteps echoing heavily in the hallway. Upon entering the room, he froze, his face pale, his eyes wide with horror as he realized who was sitting before him. Maria, with an icy calm, lifted her gaze to him. With clumsy haste, he rushed to remove the handcuffs still circling her wrists, muttering barely audible apologies. "Governor Battista, I am deeply sorry for this misunderstanding, really. We didn't realize." Meanwhile, Carlos Mejia, the officer responsible for the arrest, stood back, his face ashen, aware of the magnitude of the mistake and the gravity of his actions. He tried, in a hesitant and uncertain voice, to justify himself, as if desperately trying to absolve himself of all responsibility. I'm sorry, Governor. We thought you fit the description of the suspect." Maria looked at him, an unyielding coldness in her eyes, her piercing gaze directly fixed on him. "You didn't think," she replied in a sharp voice, each word heavy with reproach and sorrow. "You didn't listen. You acted hastily, thoughtlessly, as if my life and my identity meant nothing. You didn't even take the time to verify my words. You reduced me to a vague description, with no respect." Her frigid tone and words silenced Mejia, who dared not speak another word, his shoulders slumping under the weight of guilt. Maria slowly straightened, her wrist still red where the handcuffs had dug into her skin. In her gaze, beyond the anger, there was a fierce determination, a mix of dignity and pain. What she had just experienced was not just an incident. It was a symbol of everything she fought against every day in her role as governor. She knew this event would leave an indelible mark, not only on her but also on the reputation of the law enforcement in this state. She spoke once more to the police chief, her voice low but laden with meaning. "I hope you understand the magnitude of what you've allowed. This incident will not be easily erased, neither for me nor for everyone who witnessed this scene. You will have to answer for your actions. And know that I will not let this pass." Maria paused, letting her gaze fall upon the gathering of journalists, citizens, and cameras who waited for each word with a mix of respect and emotion. The silence in the room was almost palpable, a suspended moment where everyone felt the gravity of what was unfolding. She took a deep breath and spoke again, her voice firm, calm, and determined. "This wasn't just a mistake," she said, weighing each word. "It was a reflection of a much larger problem, deeply ingrained in the very foundations of our society. A society where you are sometimes reduced to a stereotype, where appearances take precedence over truth, where skin color becomes a judgment in itself. In this state, which I now lead, my appearance took precedence over my identity, despite the role I hold. This is not just a failure of the individuals involved, but a failure of an entire system that allows such prejudices to persist." She straightened even further, her gaze sweeping over the crowd as if to anchor every face, every expression. "What I'm asking for today is not just blame. What I'm asking for is a radical change. A change that will allow everyone to feel safe, respected, and considered for who they are, without assumptions. We must reform this system from the ground up, so that no one, neither I, nor those who look like me, nor even those who are different from me, will ever again suffer such injustice." The crowd erupted in a thunderous round of applause, but Maria remained impassive, her serious expression reflecting the weight of her mission. She knew that words alone would not suffice. It would require actions, tangible reforms that would redefine the relationship between citizens and law enforcement. This speech, she had dreamed of it, but she knew the real impact would depend on the actions she would implement. That very evening, once she had returned to the calm of her office, Maria immersed herself in the files she had long prepared, awaiting the right moment to submit them. She reviewed the reforms she was about to propose to the state legislature. There would be mandatory transparency measures for all police actions, comprehensive training on racial bias integrated at every level of law enforcement, and the establishment of an independent body to oversee cases of abuse of power. Every line, every proposal was crafted to attack the heart of the problem, but she knew it would require an intense struggle to get them accepted. The first reactions came quickly. Messages of support flooded in from citizens, civil rights organizations, and public figures who saw her as a pioneer for social justice. But there were also voices of opposition, some more virulent than others. Police unions, anticipating the scope of the reforms, issued statements condemning an attempt to demonize law enforcement, while some local elected officials, often supported by these same unions, spoke out against the proposals, calling them excessive. For Maria, this was the first battle in a much longer war. She understood that each reform would be contested, every advancement fiercely negotiated. But she was ready to embrace this struggle. Her voice, calm yet resolute, still echoed within her. I will not back down. She knew the future wouldn't be easy, but she saw it as a historic opportunity, a turning point for her state, and a message of hope for thousands of citizens waiting to see if the system could truly change. For them, for herself, and for future generations, Maria was determined to turn this trial into a victory for justice and equality. As she contemplated the colossal challenges ahead, a sudden call interrupted her thoughts. Her phone buzzed, displaying a number she didn't immediately recognize. When she answered, a hesitant, almost trembling voice came through the other end of the line. It was Carlos Mejia. Since the incident, he had been suspended from his duties pending the results of the internal investigation. Still, she hadn't expected to hear his voice, nor to receive such a personal call. After a brief silence, thick with tension, Mejia spoke. Governor, I'm sorry to bother you. I've been thinking about this incident. I would like the chance to explain myself, to speak with you face to face, if you're willing. His voice faltered, as if each word cost him something. It wasn't just about his career. It seemed almost like a form of redemption. Maria took a moment to weigh the significance of this request. She knew Mejia had made a grievous mistake, but she also sensed a rare sincerity in his voice. She didn't respond immediately. Part of her wondered whether she should grant this man the opportunity to justify himself, while another, more instinctive part, saw in this meeting a chance to further the dialogue on the changes she wanted to bring about. Finally, she replied in a calm and composed voice. I'm willing to meet with you, Carlos. But understand that this discussion will not be to excuse your actions. I want to understand, yes, but above all, we need to use this experience to move forward. The next day, in a stark meeting room, Carlos Mejia appeared, looking visibly affected, as if weighed down by the events of the past few days. He had aged in just a few days. His shoulders were slumped, and his once proud gaze now seemed filled with remorse. After a long silence, during which the atmosphere was heavy with tension, he spoke in a low, hesitant voice. I'm not looking for excuses, Governor, he said, his eyes lowered, his hands clasped in front of him as if to anchor himself in this painful truth. What I did, I can't simply explain it away as a mistake. It's deeper than that. I acted without thinking, automatically, as if something inside me took over without me realizing it. It's a pattern I unconsciously learned, a pattern I didn't even know I had internalized. Maria remained silent, watching him, her dark eyes scanning every word, every movement. She knew that this moment could be a turning point, not only for Carlos but for the whole of his team. What you said during the press conference. You were right, Carlos continued, his voice breaking slightly with emotion. We don't think. We act based on prejudices, conditioned reflexes, that we all carry within us. And in my case, these prejudices blinded me, made me take decisions that are not only unjust but go against everything I thought I was defending. He sighed deeply, as if to release the weight of the shame that pressed upon him. It's not just you I betrayed, it's also my own oath to protect and serve, my commitment to the integrity of our profession. I failed, and it's a burden I carry with difficulty. Carlos took a deep breath, as if gathering the courage to continue. I don't know what the investigation will conclude, but I wanted you to know that, whatever happens, I'm ready to contribute to the change you want to implement. I don't want others to repeat my mistakes, or even, like me, act without understanding the roots of their choices. If you need me to speak to the other officers, to help them see what I understood too late, to deconstruct these reflexes that guide us without our awareness, I'm at your disposal. After a moment of reflection, Maria crossed her arms and looked at him intently. She could see the sincerity in Carlos's eyes, a sincerity she knew was rare. What you're saying is important, Carlos. Acknowledging it, admitting it to me, is the first step. But that's not enough, she said firmly. To bring about the change we want, we need more than just an admission. I need allies, people like you to help me convince those who resist, those who cling to old patterns, to comfortable certainties. Are you ready to walk with me in this battle, to face the criticism, to endure the suspicious glances, and carry this burden to change things? Carlos Mejia nodded, visibly relieved to find a path to atone for his actions. A faint smile appeared on his face, marked by remorse but illuminated by a newfound hope. Yes, Governor. I'm ready. Because I finally believe I understand that being a good cop isn't just about following the rules. It's also about learning to question ourselves, understanding that our true duty is to serve justice, in all its complexity and demand. Maria nodded, a determined glint in her eyes. She knew the road would be long and fraught with obstacles, but with allies like Carlos, she was ready to fight this battle to the end. Weeks passed, and the unexpected collaboration between Maria Batista and Carlos Mejia began to draw the attention of more and more people. Mejia, once stigmatized as the officer responsible for a tragic mistake, started to embody a symbol of redemption and self-awareness. His role, now focused on raising awareness and reforming the police, gained credibility as he openly shared his personal experience and his sincere desire to make a difference from within. One day, during a gathering in front of a police academy, Maria and Carlos spoke together in a symbolic moment that would leave a lasting impression. Mejia, visibly moved, spoke with palpable sincerity about his awakening. He explained how Maria's unjust arrest, though embarrassing and painful, had opened his eyes to the systemic biases ingrained in police training. I thought I was a good cop, Mejia admitted, his voice trembling slightly in front of a crowd of young recruits, veterans, and citizens. But that day, I discovered that even the best intentions can be distorted by imperfect systems. I arrested someone without taking the time to verify the facts, simply because a series of invisible stereotypes overtook my ability to reason. If it happened to me, it can happen to anyone. Maria approached the microphone after him, her determined gaze sweeping over the attentive crowd. We are not here to blame individuals, but to rethink how we train, guide, and evaluate law enforcement, she declared. Our society depends on a just police force, one that protects, not one that unjustly targets. We must learn from what happened, not to condemn, but to build a better future. It is through these moments of truth that we can create a police force that meets the expectations of justice and fairness from our citizens. Maria's determination and Carlos's vulnerability deeply touched the young recruits as well as the experienced officers present that day. This initiative bore fruit. Under Maria's leadership, a pilot program was quickly launched in several police academies across the state. The program aimed to integrate comprehensive training on unconscious biases, as well as regular dialogues between the police and marginalized communities, fostering better mutual understanding. Carlos Mejia became an active participant in this program, sharing his story in classes and training workshops. With honesty, he spoke about how he had to confront his own biases and invited his colleagues to do the same. The recruits, often impressed by his humility, listened intently, aware that this speech came from a man who had had the courage to admit his mistakes. Carlos also set up discussion groups, where officers could freely exchange ideas, voice their concerns, and ask questions without fear of judgment. As the police academies began to adopt these new training methods, resistance groups began to emerge, fueled by those who saw these changes as a threat to their authority and established methods. Some former officers, reluctant to revise their practices, openly criticized these initiatives, calling them useless reforms or threats to the effectiveness of law enforcement. Rumors of discontent even spread among certain police unions, who denounced what they saw as an excessive politicization of their profession. Despite this, Maria and Carlos did not back down. Aware of the resistance, they understood they also needed to address these dissenting voices. Maria invited representatives from the opposing groups to a series of private meetings, where she listened attentively. Instead of condemning them, she sought to understand their fears and demonstrate that the reform was not meant to undermine them, but to strengthen their role and improve relations with the community. At times, Carlos spoke, explaining to the skeptics how his own biases had nearly destroyed his career and reputation, and how this realization had allowed him to grow. Gradually, some of the opponents were convinced, admitting that critical reflection on their practices could, in fact, strengthen their legitimacy and effectiveness. Over time, the movement grew, and what had initially been a pilot project became a model for other states, attracting national attention. One evening, Maria received an anonymous letter left on her desk. The contents were a series of veiled threats, accompanied by photos of Carlos Mejia and herself taken during their public appearances. The letter warned that their work would not go unnoticed and that their efforts to reform the police would be obstructed by any means possible. In the face of these new threats, Maria and Carlos increased their personal security and intensified their collaboration to counteract the resistance groups. They knew that these attacks only raised the stakes, and they were determined not to be intimidated. Maria proposed creating a working group composed of representatives from law enforcement, community members, researchers, and civil rights advocates to assess the impact of the new training and make adjustments if necessary. This group, called the Committee for Reform and Justice, met regularly to review feedback and suggestions from both police officers and citizens. Carlos, while continuing his work in raising awareness, also took on the role of mediator between the various stakeholders. His personal experiences and newly acquired credibility allowed him to open honest and sometimes difficult dialogues. He organized discussion sessions between police officers and members of marginalized communities, aiming to build trust and identify the specific issues that persisted. Over the months, the results began to show. The first reports from the committee indicated a notable reduction in incidents of racial bias in arrests and an improvement in communication between the police and citizens. Police academies that had adopted the new training programs began to see a decrease in complaints and an increase in signs of cooperation from the recruits. However, this improvement also attracted the attention of the media and groups opposed to the reforms. More and more critical reports began to appear, often fueled by distorted information or personal attacks against Maria and Carlos. These criticisms sometimes became virulent, questioning not only the reformers' intentions but also the results of the new training programs. To address these challenges, Maria and Carlos organized a large press conference where they presented concrete data on the progress made and testimonials from people who had benefited from the reforms. They invited external experts to validate their results and discuss the real impact of the new practices. This transparency and external support helped calm some of the criticism and strengthen the legitimacy of their efforts. Despite the progress, the road remained long and fraught with obstacles. Tensions between reformers and conservatives persisted, and Maria and Carlos had to continue navigating a climate of mistrust and resistance. But their perseverance and commitment to justice slowly began to influence the overall climate, and their example inspired many others to support similar initiatives elsewhere. Maria and Carlos's work was far from over, but each success, no matter how modest, was a victory on the winding path of reform. They knew that true transformation required constant commitment and the willingness to overcome obstacles in order to build a more equitable society. Thus ends our story, but the lessons it carries resonate deeply. The fight for justice is an ongoing journey, and each of us has a role to play. Like Maria and Carlos, may we find the strength to fight for a world where every voice is heard and every individual treated with dignity.